Hello, my name is Anna Georgiou, and I'm a developer advocate at InfluxData. And today I have Barbara Nelson with me.
Hi, I'm Barbara Nelson. I'm the VP of Engineering at InfluxData.
So today we want to talk about how do developers like to build applications? And specifically, we want to address the question, what does it mean to meet developers where they are? Because we throw that phrase around a lot, but what does it really mean to meet them where they are? Where are they?
It's a great question. It's a great phrase. I love it. It really does guide everything we do. To meet a developer where they are, there's kind of 4 different spectrums. So start with the basic one, which is where are they in their learning about time series data at all? So you've got some developers who they start, maybe they use a different type of database, and at some point they realize this database is just not great for my work. So there must be one that's more optimized around time series. And so then they search for on the web for time series and up we come. And so then they start learning about, well, what is it about InfluxDB and how is it going to solve my problems? And so you have that spectrum of where are they on just the discovery of, is this the right solution? And if so, how do I use it? So then you also have the journey of where are they on the learning curve. So they may be relatively new to InfluxData. They may not be terribly familiar with the Flux language, or they may be a very skilled, able to navigate their way through a very powerful Flux platform. So then the second spectrum is their skill set. So you've got some very novice developers that are really just learning how to navigate a time series database at all. And so we focus a lot on kind of training as part of the UI to really guide them through that experience. And then you've some who are kind of power users. They know Flux very, very well. They know what they need for their particular use case. Another spectrum is where are they in terms of how do they want this solution to work for them? Is it going to all run in their own environment? Maybe they want a pure open source solution, or maybe they want something that's in an environment that they manage, an on-prem solution, or they don't want to deal with that. They're going, these time series metrics, why don't you guys manage them for me so that they will work as they scale up my needs? I don't have to keep changing this thing. So then it'll be, okay, for them, we have a cloud solution. Where's their cloud solution? Again, we meet them where they are. If they're in AWS, we have a cloud solution there. If they're in GCP, Azure, we have it there. If they're in North America, we have it there. If they're in Europe, we have it there. So we have different environments based on where they need to be.
Absolutely. And I think there's also all these different tools that we have depending on how developers like to work, right? You said a little bit about whether or not they like to work in the UI or VS Code, but we also have, the CLI, if that's how you prefer to interact with InfluxDB, and then how you want to ingest data, right? You can use the client libraries, but you can also use Telegraph, exactly. And you also mentioned creating all these different tools and how some developers, the first step is realizing that they have a need for a time series database and recognizing that time series data is different and encouraging users to keep their relational data in a relational database and their time series data in a time series database and pull in data from relational databases as needed, like with Flux, for example.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great point. So, we have a client library in 12 different languages. We assume that the developers want to stay in whatever language they're in. They don't want to find that they have to move to a whole new language just to manage their time series metrics. And so we have client APIs in 12 different languages. We also have the CLI, as you mentioned, and we have solutions for them to use no matter what kind of environment that they're working in, because their needs are very different. And that's one thing. There's no one size fits all for developers using time series metrics. They've got all sorts of different applications, and really being able to cater to whatever their needs are is really important for us.
And can you talk a little bit about how the unified API between OSS and cloud kind of enables developers to be flexible in their journey?
Sure. And that is a really important piece. We don't assume that their journey is one direction. We don't assume they're going open source and they'll outgrow open source and then they'll move to a highly available enterprise and then they'll move to a cloud. We don't assume that at all. Depending on their needs, they may end up with a real mix and match of all of that. And it can't be a jarring experience of being, I was used to the API and now I move to the cloud and your APIs are all totally different. It has to be consistent. And so we work really hard as a team to make sure that whatever we're delivering is delivered in a very consistent fashion, so that the developers really can mix and match the tools, but feel like they all fit together.
And that even touches upon like support for InfluxQL. So if you did come from 1.x and you're migrating, right? Can you talk some more about that?
Yeah, very much so. We don't assume that if they are moving to Cloud 2, they have to go change languages. So we have InfluxQL. It's a great query language. We also have Flux. It's a very powerful, more sophisticated language. They can pick and choose between both of them. We make both of them work. Similarly, you talked earlier about the Telegraph, the agent-based approach. So we make sure that that fits with whichever product. You can use the exact same agent to write your data to an on-prem solution, to an open source solution, or to a cloud solution.
Yeah, thank you. So I think like the kind of overarching theme here is that we just want to provide developers with the most flexibility to work how they want to work, right?
Yeah, I mean, it has to really fit for them. One of the things I've seen recently is developers are impatient. Shocking. They can't and won't take too long to evaluate a technology. They have to get from, is this the right solution for my needs, to this is the right solution to make it work. And they have to do that really quickly. There's no more take a couple of weeks to evaluate this technology and decide. It's like, I found it in the morning. If it isn't working for my use case by the afternoon, I'm moving on. And so in that world, we have to make sure that we kind of make it really easy for them to figure out what our solutions are, how do they work, how do they fit in their use case for the problem they're trying to solve? And we know we've a limited amount of time and a limited amount of their attention. They've got busy jobs to do too. And so we have a very limited amount of time to help them understand what our technology is and how it's going to solve problems for them.
What does that journey typically look like if you had to describe? We talked about how developers come in and first it's like discovering that need. But what are some of like the tools and resources that developers first gravitate towards as they go on their journey from discovering a need for InfluxDB to maybe becoming proficient in Flux and using a Visual Studio Code Flux integration?
Sure. So the first thing is developers program in very many different languages. And so it's a question of, have we got a solution for them in the language they need? They're not going to learn a different language just to be able to interface to a database. And so that's why, for example, we've got client APIs in 12 different languages already. And so we're trying to kind of understand their use case. We also focus a lot on kind of that learning journey. So in our web UI, the interactive interface is all around helping them build that skill set, showing them the shape of their data. This is the data that you've entered in. This is how you got the data in. And now look at it in that context. This is how you can build your Flux queries. This is how you can get more sophisticated. And then helping them see kind of what are the performance characteristics of these kinds of things. So as they are developing their application, they can really fine-tune it in a way that makes most sense for them. And depending on different applications, you see developers with very different needs. You've some developers where performance sensitivity is an enormous part of their application. They're offering a solution where they may be doing some kind of very real-time alerting, and so it has to be fast. You've other developers where that may not be as important a characteristic for them. They want to understand how their application's working, but it's more for kind of analysis after the fact. So it's upload the data and then be able to look at it after the fact. For those kind of developers, they may be very cost conscious. It may be, I want to upload all this data, but I don't want to spend a fortune on storing it. And so really guiding all these developers around what is the best way for them to use the platform rather than us simply saying, this is the one way you use the platform.
Absolutely. I think a huge factor to that ability for developers to have that flexibility and go on that discovery journey is like the unified API between the OSS offering and the cloud offering. Because I see so many developers that they start with the free tier cloud option just to kind of get introduced to InfluxDB, get a feel for it. It's kind of like a first date, see if they like it at all. And then they decide, yes, this is something that I want to pursue. They download the open source version. They play with that for a while. And then they learn that I don't want to be managing my own instance. I need InfluxDB Cloud because I'm too focused on delivering my application. And then from there, even using InfluxDB to monitor their InfluxDB instance as well, so that they can also gain more performance metrics.
Exactly. And so really understanding that and giving them the flexibility. Developers hate having a fixed fork in the road. They hate if you want this, you have to do it that way, and if you want that, you have to do it that way. So being able to let them kind of go on their journey wherever their journey takes them, but continuing to have a consistent solution for them wherever that journey takes them.
How do you choose which developer tools to focus on, which ones to start working on next? And can you give me some examples of some of the tools that you provided? We already talked about the unified API and some of the client libraries. Can you expand on some of the other tools and,
Sure.
and how you prioritize them? That's a lot.
So how we prioritize them is we rely on folks like you as really being kind of the voice of the community. So we need to hear from the developers, and we hear from the developers in many ways. We hear from them through the community, we hear from them in the contributions into GitHub, through our support channels. We get all sorts of developer feedback, and we really look to the community to a certain extent to prioritize that for us. We have our own sense. We know where the industry is going. We know what are the important problems that need to be solved. And so we certainly take a lead in a lot of this, but we really rely heavily on the developers to kind of give us that feedback and be the ones to let us know if a feature looks like it's a good idea or not. And so we look to engage with them in early access programs, in user testing, in showing them stuff in the open source community early on to get their feedback, to really get a sense of where they're going. And then sometimes they also look to us to say, hey, if I have these time series metrics, what additional value can I get out of them? Because some of them will start with, oh, it's just metrics. And we're like, wait, it's a lot more than just metrics. It's super valuable and can really help you extend your application in a way that you may not have thought about up to now.
Yeah, I think similarly, you were talking earlier about how people start just wanting to do a simple query with Flux, and then before you know it, they're actually doing a lot of data processing and analyzing their data with it. So that kind of similar.
Yeah, because data has value. And so the more you can get the value out of that data by enabling you to do more with it is hugely powerful. So I remember in previous lives, people say, we don't have that data. I was like, well, we actually do have that data, but we have no way to analyze it. So it's sitting there. It's like the thing that's kind of, all in that forgotten drawer. If you don't have a way to access it, it's almost as if you don't have it.
Right, that's a good point. And so how do developers know which offering is right for them? I mean, you talked a little bit about the discovery process for them, but how do they help come to that conclusion about where they should start?
Yeah, I mean, the open source product is a great way for them to start by just playing around with it and downloading. I find there's a lot of camaraderie in the community. So whether it's through the Slack channels or the discussion forums, where developers will help each other a lot. So you'll have one developer who says, hey, I'm trying to do this. And another one will come in and go, oh, I tried that. This is a better way of doing that, or this is what you should do. So they really do work together in addition to working with us. And so I think that's a really important part of how we all fit together in this, is really recognizing that the time series community is much larger than InfluxData. And while we have an important role to play in that community, we're not the only ones in that community.
And so speaking of the community, can you tell me about some of the contributions that some of the Influx community has given to engineering, and kind of like what that relationships looks like from an engineering perspective?
Sure. I'd have to call out the Telegraph community. I mean, we have over 300 different input and output plugins, and many of them are community contributed. We have a couple of community members who are active members of the whole review process for that community. And so that is a really important piece of it. But they're not the only ones. We're very active in the Data Fusion and Apache Arrow open source projects. One of the ways that this is of value to our developers is that it really validates that there's an importance to what they're doing. There's nothing worse than building a product and then just feeling like nobody's actually using it. And so the fact that we have a very active community energizes the developers. It gives them a way to see and get really early feedback. You try something out, you put it out there, you tell the community about it, and you're going to hear very, very quickly the good and the bad. And so that's really important. And then events like this. We love InfluxDays. We love it as a way to tell the community a little bit more specifically as to what's coming next and really get their feedback in that forum.
Yeah, and having that opportunity to meet those challenges and hear that criticism. That's right, cool. What are some of the challenges of trying to support all of these different tools for developers? And how do you avoid sort of having a user experience that's fragmented and instead creating one that feels consistent and cohesive?
It's a great question. It's a question I ask myself every day. The good and the bad of offering a solution in so many different ways is it's more work. We don't just build the thing once and there it is and it's for everybody. So we have to build the same things in different ways many, many times. And so kind of that's the challenge. And just from a pure staffing standpoint, it takes more people to do all of that. The good is that you really feel you can kind of fine-tune the solution for the particular use case. So kind of what we deliver in the VS Code plugin is very different, and it has targeted at a different audience than what we deliver through the web UI, for example. So it really helps make the developers feel more kind of empowered in what they're building when they know they can target a very specific community.
That makes a ton of sense. And I also think part of maintaining that consistency is consistency across documentation and marketing efforts. And can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Absolutely, yes. So we try really hard that we don't have kind of a jarring experience for a developer. So if no matter how they've come to us, if they started with, I just downloaded the docs and I read them, and then I started looking at open source, and then I started looking at the Flux language, what does that mean? So we're very consistent on the terminology. The developers work very closely together. So the team that's building the web UI for interfacing with the Flux language is working really closely with the team that's building VS Code interface, working really closely with the team that's actually enhancing and developing the Flux language itself. So we really make sure that by working closely together, they are delivering a consistent experience, even if they're delivering it through different channels and different mechanisms. And then we look to folks like your team on the developer advocacy program to really catch if we've diverged. You're very quick to tell us and make sure we bring it all back together. And our technical writer group, they do the same thing. So they'll be the ones that present a feature as a unified feature and then show kind of what are the different vehicles to which that feature is delivered.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite parts about working at Influx is just how good the cross-team collaboration is. Mm-hmm. And that's evidenced in the consistency that we see across the products, across the UI, UX experience, and the docs, et cetera, because you can't get that sort of consistency if you don't work across teams.
You have to talk to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't tell you how many times I've been on meetings where there's a person from every single different team working together, mm-hmm. taking feedback from everybody and really efficiently reaching consensus. And so that's a really cool thing to see.
Yeah, because we start from the developer. We're like, what is it that they need? What is it that they want us to do? And then we go from there to what is the impact to our various teams and how do they all work together? We don't start with one team saying, I feel like building a feature.
Right, absolutely. Thank you, Barbara, for taking the time to talk about how InfluxData meets developers and their needs.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. And I look forward to seeing you all at the next session.